Hi everybody, welcome to our live crochet event. I'm Brenda KB Anderson, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to work up the Oak Grove ear flap hat. This is what they look like. So these hats come in at pretty much every head size, baby through a large adult, so you can make one for everybody and do a little family matching if you're into that. And the pattern is free, so you can just go ahead and download your pattern if you haven't done that already. There's a link in the description for this pattern, so you can download it now, or you can always download it later. You can access this later, no problem, if you just want to watch and see how it's done first. So first we're going to talk about materials. So for this ear flap hat, I chose a nice sort of a basic wool, worsted weight wool. So it'd be nice and warm. And you know, this can be substituted with other kinds of wools or acrylics. The specifics for this wool are listed in your pattern, the brand that I used and how many yards per skein and all that stuff and how much you'll need for each size. That's all listed in the pattern. But it's a fairly, just a fairly rustic kind of worsted weight wool. And it comes in lots of different colors too, so that's another reason that I chose it. So you'll need some of that. Let's see, you'll need somewhere between 165 to 265 yards, depending on the size that you're making, of the main color. And then you'll just need a smaller amount of the contrast color. So the contrast color is just the pom-pom, and then the edging around the bottom, and these little braided ear flaps. So another option for you, you can also make it all in one color if you want, or you can make it in one color and then you can add, you know, like a faux fur pom-pom or something to the top if you want to change it up a little bit. So you'll need your wool, and then you'll need a crochet hook. I used an H, which is a 5mm crochet hook, and that's for most of the hat. That's for the majority of the hat. And then there's the edging around the bottom of the hat. I used a smaller crochet hook. I used an F, 3.75mm. So I would start with those and do a gauge swatch as specified in the pattern, and you can check your gauge. And but you're going to end up using whatever hook you need to be able to make your gauge swatch match mine. So it doesn't matter if you're using a bigger hook, a smaller hook. You just want to make sure that when you make a gauge swatch of the main stitch pattern that it measures the same as mine. Otherwise, your hat will not turn. It'll have some surprising fitting issues. Okay, if you don't check that. Okay. So those are the basics, and then you'll also need a yarn needle, some scissors, and then especially if you're newer to crochet or if you're newer to working in the yarn over slip stitch pattern that I will be showing you, I would recommend having at least 2 stitch markers. The stitch markers, you can just put one in each end of the piece that you're working on to keep track of your ends so that you don't end up missing a stitch or accidentally adding a stitch at the end where you're not supposed to. Okay, so those are your materials. And I just wanted to mention too, this hat is constructed sideways actually. So this is what you're gonna end up making for the main part of the hat. It's this kind of shape. It's basically a rectangle where you're working back and forth in these turned rows, and then you're going to do some increasing to add a little length here, and then you're going to work even for a while, and then you're going to do some decreasing here, then you're going to work even for a while and do more increasing, working even, decreasing, working even. Okay, so you're working it back and forth in this direction, and then we're going to seam it together using crochet, so we don't have to sew it, and then the top will get gathered, and then there's some edging on the bottom. So that is the main program here. That's what we're going to be doing. I just wanted to give you a little overview because it's a little bit easier to see where we're going if you can see what this looks like. All right, so let's get started. Oh, and another thing I just wanted to make sure you guys know, obviously this is a live event, so if you're watching and you want to say hi, you can say hi in the comments section. So I know you're out there. Also, if I am going too quickly over things, or if you missed something, or you just need a little bit more explanation, please be sure to put that in the comment section so that I can see you need a little extra help, and I'll try to go over those areas again for you. Or, you know, if you, also another thing that I like, if when people put in the comment section, I like to know what you guys would like to make next. So give me suggestions on the types of things, the types of projects that you'd like to learn, because I do these live events pretty often, and I like to get a sense of what people would like to learn next. And actually, speaking of that, this particular project is a result of somebody suggesting that I make a pattern for an ear flap hat for a toddler. So I thought, well, perfect, I'll make one for a toddler, but I want to make one for everybody so it can fit everyone. All right, so that's where this came from. So we're going to start with our larger hook, and we're going to be making the smallest size, which is the same as this little yellow one. This is the baby size. And let's see, if you look in your pattern, you can do this later if you haven't downloaded it yet, but your instructions are going to show some stuff in parentheses. So if you're newer to reading patterns, what these parentheses are all about, these are telling you different instructions for all the different sizes. So at the beginning of the pattern where it tells you, it explains the sizes that you can make right here. So baby, toddler, a child or a small adult, an adult medium, adult large. So it's listed in order of smallest to largest, and each place within those parentheses that shows what the directions are for the size that you're making. So for example, we're making the smallest size, so we look here and then we're going to use the first number. If we were using the middle size, if we were working up the middle size, we would skip over to this number right here that's in the center. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sizes. The third one would be the one that we would follow, okay? All right, so we're going to be chaining 27 to start. So just make a slip knot on your larger hook, and then we're going to chain 27. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is problematic today. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Okay, so here's our chain length that we're going to start with for the smallest size. And then in row 1, we're going to start with the second chain from the hook, and we're going to work into the bottom of the chain, and we're going to make 1 yarn over slip stitch into each stitch across, okay? So what all that means is we are going to skip this loop here that's next to the hook. So you don't worry about the loop that's on the hook. Then there's another loop right here. We're skipping that because that counts as our turning chain. And we're going to work into this stitch right here. This is the second stitch from the hook. But we're going to work into the bottom of the stitch. So if you look at the top of the stitch, that looks like a V. And if you roll it over so it's facing the other way, you'll see a horizontal dash. And that's where we're going to work. So to do a yarn over slip stitch, we'll yarn over. And then we're going to insert our hook from front to back underneath that horizontal loop. And then we're going to yarn over again, pull up a loop, and we're going to continue pulling that loop through these 2 loops on the hook, okay? So we'll do that a couple more times. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, pull through 2. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, continue to pull through 2. So this is really similar to, well, it's kind of like in between a slip stitch and a half double crochet in some ways. The slip stitch, you know, the only difference is you do a yarn over before you do the slip stitch, right? The half double crochet, normally you yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and then at this point, if you were doing a half double crochet, you'd yarn over again. But you're not going to do that. You're just going to take that loop that you pulled up and pull it through those 2. That's the difference. Okay, so we're going to work all the way across your chain, working into those bottom bumps. See, you can see if you flip the chain this way, you'll see it looks the same on the bottom as it does on the top, little V's. You're going to work back and forth in this pattern. And actually, on the next row, you're just going to be working in the back loop. Let me show you that part here. We'll get a little further so we have a little more to work with, and then I'll show you how to turn and start working in the opposite direction. Okay, so we're just going to pretend that I've worked all the way to the end here, okay, the end of our chain. when you get to the end over here, you're going to chain 1 for your turning chain, and then you're going to turn your piece like you're flipping a page in a book. And then you are going to do yarn over slip stitches, but only through the back loop, which I'll show you right here. And we'll be going over this again later too. So we're not going to work into our turning chain. This is the next stitch we'd be working into, but we are going to work under just the back loop, which is right here. Not under both, but just under the back. Okay? So we will yarn over, insert under that back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. Yarn over, go through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. So the only difference between a yarn over slip stitch, which is abbreviated in my pattern YOSLST, that's a yarn over slip stitch. The only difference between that and what I'm doing now, which is the yarn over slip stitch through the back loop, is we're just working underneath that back loop, okay? So that's the only difference. All right, and that's what gives it that sort of ribbed appearance. I mean, this stitch pattern really looks oddly like knitting. It looks a lot like a fisherman's rib stitch or something like that, where you've got grooves in between these lines of V's. All right, so you're going to work back and forth in these turned rows, and your piece is going to look like this. So because we're doing the smallest size, we've worked up through row 5 here. And then on row 6, that says begins increase section. So we're going to start increasing, and that means we're going to start adding some stitches on this end to make the ear flap, to make it kind of curve down for that ear flap. So we've worked all the way across. This is the end of row 5. And then at row 6, we're going to chain 3 and turn. So 1, 2, 3, and turn your work like you're flipping a page in the book. And then you're going to start with the second stitch from the hook, the second chain from the hook, and then you're going to work into that back part of the stitch, that back loop of the stitch, okay? So that's the same as what we were just doing under here. In the chain, it would be here or here. So the second stitch from the hook, we're going to yarn over slip stitch right there. And then do that again in the next chain, do that back loop. And we're going to continue to work all the way across. So in this pattern, you are only increasing and decreasing on one edge of your piece. So the rest of it is just a rectangle. It's just along one side of your rectangle that kind of swoops out for the ear flaps and swoops back in. Okay, so you're just going to continue working yarn over slip stitches through that back loop all the way across to the end, and then you'll chain 1. And then on the next stitch, on the next row, this is row 7 for the smallest size, you're going to yarn over, slip stitch, back loop into each stitch across until 1 stitch remains. Then you're going to yarn over, slip stitch in the next stitch. So what that means is, let me show you on the next piece. Here we are working towards the end of row 7. So we're yarn over, slip stitching through the back loop only all the way across to here. And then we're going to continue yarn over, slip stitch until 1 stitch remains. So that's the second to the last stitch there. So there's 1 stitch that remains right here. Then we are going to do a yarn over, slip stitch, but not through just the back loop. We're going to do it underneath both of those loops of the V. See? So right here, we're going to insert our hook underneath both of those. All right, so insert, pull up, and pull through 2. And the reason you might be wondering, okay, what's the difference? Why are we all of a sudden working under both of those loops? And the reason is because if you don't do that, then there's going to be a bigger hole here where it gets kind of pulled open a little bit. So we're just doing that one last stitch underneath both loops. All right, so then we have, let's see, here we are, the end of row 7. So we're going to begin row 8. This is another increase row. This time we're going to chain 4 to begin. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we turn our work. And then we're going to begin working in that second chain, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through 2. We're going to do that 2 more times, once into each of the next 2 chains, just like that. And then we're going to continue working yarn over slip stitches across the rest of our row, just like this. So another thing you might be wondering is, hey, Brenda, why aren't we just doing a regular increase instead of chaining on stitches like that? Normally, you would just do 2 stitches in 1 stitch and call that your increase. Like, why are we making a chain and then working into that chain to extend it? And I actually did try making this ear flap hat in the other way, where we would just, instead of extending by chains and then working more stitches, I did actually try putting 2 stitches into a stitch to make it a little larger. But what it was doing, it was constricting my work so much, it was bending it backwards like this, because I wanted to add too many stitches at a time. Like right here, because we chained 4 and then skipped that last chain as a turning chain, we're actually adding 3 stitches here. And that was just too many to put into here and expect it to reach. So it just wasn't shaping correctly. I didn't like how it was working. So that's why we have this kind of interesting, add some on by doing chains at the end. That's another way of increasing, especially if you want to increase a lot more quickly than just adding a couple of stitches. If you want to add 3, you really have to do something to extend what you're working into. All right, so you're going to continue working back and forth and back and forth. And I'm not going to go through every single step where you increase on each single row, because I don't think anybody wants to watch that. But you'll just follow your pattern, and now that you're going to chain and then you're going to add some stitches that way, you'll be doing however many increases it says for your size. And then when you stop doing your increases, let's see, there's a little section where you're just working back and forth for a few rows. Let's see, rows 11 through 16 on the baby size. You just work back and forth without doing any increases. You're just working back and forth and back and forth. So on row number 17, actually this would be a good time for me to show you how to count your rows too in this stitch pattern, because you're going to need to be able to keep track of what row you're on, and it gets a little confusing, and sometimes you're watching a show and it's really good, and then all of a sudden you're like, what row am I on? I have no idea. So it's good to know how to count them. So each time you make a row across in this stitch pattern, what you're doing is you're making these columns of V's, or these ridges of V's on the back side of what you're working. So you can see the columns of V's right here. That's because this last row was worked this way. So we worked across here and made those V's. So just keep that in mind. So you'll see a ridge for every other row. So if you take a look at this, there's kind of an indentation below this ridge. That's because the ridge is on this side. So that's one row there. So once you get that started, once you figure out where you actually start counting, it helps a lot. So that would be row 1, row 2, and then we can count by 2. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. We've worked row 16, and now we're on row 17. All right. So in row 17, that's where we start doing our decreases. So you can see here's our ear flap. So we're not going to do any decreases until we get to the area where we're shaping for the ear flap, okay? So we're going to chain 1 and turn on row 17, and we're going to do a yarn over slip stitch through the back loop all the way across until, let's see, into the next 30 stitches until there's 2 stitches left. And then we're going to do a yarn over slip stitch 2 together through the back loop. That is a very long, crazy abbreviation. I am aware of that. But all that it means is we're working in the same stitch pattern and we're just doing a decrease, and I will show you how to do that and once we get to the end there. Sometimes the abbreviations can be kind of cumbersome, and it's hard to know. When I was writing this pattern, I thought, well, maybe I should just write yarn over slip stitch decrease. But then I thought, well, it's actually kind of helpful to know that you're putting 2 stitches together, like what kind of decrease this is. So, yeah. That's always a little struggle in my mind when I'm writing patterns, like how to communicate the best way so that it's simple for people to understand and they don't get overwhelmed by all of the long abbreviations that I like to write in my patterns. But it really helps having these videos, because then you can just watch it and say, okay, that whole big long abbreviation thing, all it means is this. And it's not really a problem. All right, we are almost at the end. Let's see, we just have to stop After we've worked 30 stitches and there's 2 stitches left to work, let's see, 2 more stitches and we'll be there. All right, so there's 2 stitches left right here. And we are going to work that big, long, crazy decrease. So we're going to yarn over like we're doing a regular yarn over slip stitch through the back loop. And then we're going to go through the back loop, just like before. But then we're going to go through the next back loop from front to back. Okay, so we're just going through one back loop and then going through the next back loop. Then we're going to yarn over, pull through both of those stitches, and continue to pull through the 2 loops on your hook. Okay, so that's the decrease. We decreased it by 1 stitch. Before there were 2, and now there's 1. So then we would yarn over and turn our work, and then work row 18, which is just straight across, 1 yarn over slip stitch through the back loop, and each stitch all the way across to the end. On the following row, you are going to be doing 2 decreases in a row. So I'm just going to show you real quick what that looks like. So just imagine we've already worked back and forth and we're getting to the end of the next row. This would be at the end of row 19, 21, 23, 25, 27, depending on what size you're making. So you have to stop when there are 4 stitches left to decrease because you're doing 2 decrease stitches, and each decrease stitch takes 2 stitches. So you'll yarn over, insert, insert through both those back loops, yarn over, pull through, and pull through the 2 on your hook, and then you're going to do that a second time. Through both those back loops, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. So you've got 2 decreases on that next row. Okay, I'm going to undo that because I don't want to confuse myself later when I look at that, because that was for 2 rows later. All right. So then you're just going to continue working, following your pattern. So you'll decrease when it says to decrease, and then you're going to work back and forth in turned rows for a section. So here's where we started. We did some increases. We worked even. Then we did some decreases. And you're just going to continue to follow your pattern. There's a section. This is what I mean by working across the forehead, because this is where your face would be. So you're just going to work even here for that section. Then you're going to do some more increasing, working even, and decreasing. And we've already gone through, that's made in the same way as this. Just follow your instructions, and it'll lead you through putting in where you need to do your increases and decreases. All right, so then you're going to get this kind of long rectangle with these kind of swoops out for the ear flaps here. And let's see. So we've ended our last row. Put my hook in here. And then we are going to chain 1 and turn as if we're going to work another row. And then we take the foundation chain. Let's see, I think we put that directly in front. Let me double check. All right, we're going to look at the seaming row here. Seaming row, turn as if to work another row, fold matching the ends, with foundation row directly behind the last row worked. And then we're going to, okay, so that means here's the foundation row where we started, and that's going to be directly behind the last row that we worked, which is right here. We're just matching them up, and there will be the same amount of stitches in the 2 rows. And then we are going to be working through the front loops, let's see, both loops in the front section, and just the front loops of the row in the back. Okay, so what that looks like is, so you go under both loops in the front, and then you're going to go through just the front loops of the edge in back, which is here. Okay, so what, maybe I should show a little better what that is. Here is, this kind of wants to curve to the back, so be aware of that. I'll pull it up and then you can see. See, there's the V right there. So you're just going to be working through those front loops, which is right here, of that row that's held in the back, okay? So I've slid my hook underneath both loops like you would normally stitch, and then we're going to go through that front loop. And we're going to grab our yarn, pull it through, and pull through the loop on our hook. We're going to continue that, sliding it under both, sliding it under the loop in front, grab your yarn, pull it through, just like that. And we'll be working that all the way across. And if you prefer, at this point, if you don't want to do this crocheting part here along this edge, you don't have to. You can fasten off and you can just seam this, and then you'll join your yarn later at the end, because we actually do need to continue stitching a little bit around the edge at the bottom. But you know, I've done this both ways because I was trying to get the nicest looking seam that I could, something that would not be very distracting. And I don't know, it was kind of like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And I couldn't decide which way to do it. So that I'm going to leave that up to you. But in the pattern, I specify to do this slip stitching to seam it closed here. All right, let's see. Oh, and Marcy appreciates my explanation with repetitive cadence. So explaining how to do the repeats or how to maybe count the rows. I'm glad that worked for you. Okay, almost there. And then I'll turn it so that you guys can see what it looks like. 2 more stitches. Oops, somewhere I missed a stitch. Okay, I'm just going to show you this. It's time to fess up here. All right, so there's 3 stitches. Oh no, wait, maybe I didn't miss a stitch. I didn't miss a stitch, but if you did miss a stitch and you found out when you got this close, honestly, you could probably just back it up just a little ways and then just sort of fake it by going twice into whatever edge didn't have enough. I was looking at this incorrectly, and I actually do have the same amount of stitches. I didn't actually mess up, but that gave me a little opportunity to explain what to do if you do screw it up. I mean, of course, if you want to be extra good about it, you could pull the whole thing back until you found your mistake, but nobody's going to notice if you just, you know, kind of slip an extra stitch in there. All right, so you've reached the end, and then this seam is actually going to be on the inside of your hat, so you're going to turn your hat so the seam is on the inside, just like that. And with a little bit of steam, a little bit of blocking, that will make this sort of crack or whatever, this little valley here, a little bit less obvious that that's where your seam is. But really, it doesn't look too bad. You can barely see it. All right, so at this point, this is where you're going to switch hooks, because you will need to be working into your row ends, and it was easier to switch hooks and make a tighter stitch than it would be to do a bunch of math and figure out how many stitches to do everywhere. That just didn't work out for me. I like to avoid math when I can. Okay, so here we are at this valley, and we are going to start working around the edge because it just makes it look a little bit tidier. And then that's going to give us a place to put our contrast edging on. And we're going to begin by working right here into the end of this V. Okay, so in the pattern, I'm telling you to work into the ridges. This is what I call a ridge, where it sticks out and there's this sort of column of V's. So you're going to work into that edge there. And then you are going to work into the place between your ridges. So that would be right here, okay? So we're gonna just do a regular single crochet. Let me see. We're in the edging section here, so we're just going to be working in the single crochet around, let's see. Oh, I just realized right here, there's a typo. We should be working this with the main color, not the contrast color. So change that on your pattern, and I will try to get that corrected. But we are just going to continue with this color for the first round, and then we're going to switch to the contrast color. All right, so we're doing a single crochet. Let me just back up here. We're inserting our hook at the end of that ridge, pulling up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Then we're going to put a stitch marker in there so we know where our first stitch was, just because it's easy to get lost. And then you can do another single crochet in between your ridges right here. So, and then you're going to do another single crochet here, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then another one between ridges. Okay, so you're just going to continue until you get to your ear flap. doing 1 single crochet in each row end. So a row end is a ridge or a valley between ridges. Okay, those are the row ends. Then when it starts getting to this section where you have different amounts of increases and your ear flap is kind of coming up here, you just need to eyeball this and see how many you think will fit. I think I'm going to put 2 single crochets here, 1 and 2, and then you're going to work into the end of your ridge, single crochet. And then this one, maybe I might be able to fit 3 because it's a little bit taller. So, you know, if you end up with too many stitches, it's going to start making the end kind of get wavy. It'll look too bunched up. You can just pull it out and do 1 fewer stitch there. If you aren't working enough stitches, let me show you what would happen if we just worked 1 stitch in here and then 1 stitch in here. See how it kind of made this little bulge? That means it's just not quite reaching. It's constricting the edge too much there. So we're not going to do that either. So you can just pull it out and add in extra stitches. I mean, basically the whole point of this entire section here is just to put a nice edging on it that's not going to constrict your stitches and it's not going to make the edge ruffly. We're just working kind of a tidy edge along our row ends here to sort of polish them up a little bit and make them look a little bit neater and tidier. And Elaine is thanking me. Hi, Elaine. Thank you for being here and for your kind words. All right, so we've crocheted across this section, and then we're going to do the same thing going down here. Just add in extra single crochets if you need them. You know, you're just watching your edge to make sure that it's not puckering or ruffling. And when you get to those ridges, try to put a single crochet in the ends of those because it looks nice. Don't miss the ridges. Okay, so you're just going to continue doing that all the way around your hat, or all the way around the edge of your hat. And then when you get to your stitch marker, you'll just do a slip stitch and fasten off in that first stitch right there. Okay, so I'm going to show you what that looked like. So we've continued working all the way around and we have this nice edge here. And then we are going to use our contrast color if we're using a contrast color. And if you're not, if you're just doing this all in one color, you don't have to add another edge unless you want to. What the next edge will do is it'll make it a little bit, kind of like the edging a little bit thicker if you do it in the same color. It'll still, I don't know, maybe I would just add it anyway. You can see what it looks like. Okay, so where we did our last slip stitch to join, we're gonna just pull up a loop there of our contrast color, just like that. And then we'll chain 1. And then we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch into each stitch around. So, and I should say we're continuing with that smaller hook. So we're going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through 2. And I'll do a couple and then I'll explain why I'm doing this particular stitch here. And you can just watch this to make sure that you're not constricting your stitches or you're not making it ruffle. Sometimes when you add another round, I don't know, it might change the, what am I trying to say, like the length of your stitches might be a little bit different. So you just want to keep your eye on that, and you can adjust by using a larger hook or a smaller hook if it's giving you problems. But you do want to put 1 stitch in every stitch around, and it'll look nice and tidy because you already had that first round of the matching color put in, so it should be a nice smooth round. Now the reason that I'm doing yarn over slip stitch instead of just a single crochet or, you know, a slip stitch at this point is because it almost has like 2 edges. So here's your like an edge of V's right here, and then if you roll it this way, there's another edge right here. And I really liked how that looked. I just thought that it looked, I don't know, very crisp on the edge there. So that's why I chose the same stitch pattern we were using for back and forth in turned rows for the body of the hat. I'm just continuing with that same stitch pattern. So you're just going to be working all the way around 1 stitch in each stitch around. And just keep your eye on the edge and make sure that it's not getting too tight or too loose. I'll do a few more stitches and then I'm going to show you how to close the top of the hat. And Cheryl says she likes having other options in hat making rather than just the top down and the round. Yeah, when I design things, I often like to switch it up and construct things in different or less conventional ways sometimes. It's a nice way to just change it up, and for this particular design, I really wanted to showcase how cool the yarn over slip stitch through the back loop stitch pattern is, because it's very different than a lot of other crochet stitch patterns that I've used before, because it's extra stretchy. Let me show you. I should have mentioned this before. Look at that. Super stretchy. And it just has this very neat and tidy look to it. So I do know some people who don't really like the look of sort of a bumpier, more organic stitches, that a lot of times we see in crochet. They prefer the look of knitting. So if you're making this for somebody like that, that's not me, by the way. I like all the crochet stitches. But some people just prefer to have this type of look to their fabric, and that's completely fine. But I just wanted to show everybody, like, hey, you can do that with crochet too. It doesn't have to be knit. All right, so as we worked all the way around with our yarn over slip stitch, we'll get to the end, and then you're just going to slip stitch into that first stitch and then fasten off. And then you can weave in your ends, and if you want to at this point, you can block your hat. Just use, soak it in a little bit of water and then lay it flat to dry, or you can steam it if you want. You can even block your piece before you stitch the seam together if you want to block it flat. It just depends on how much blocking you think that it needs and how you prefer to do it. But I would recommend blocking this hat at some point. Okay, so you're going to do the edging all the way around, and then I'll just fasten off here so that we can give myself enough extra so I can finish this later. All right, and then at this point, you can stitch your hat closed. Let's see, where's the back? Here's the center back. You can stitch the top of your hat closed by using a piece of the same main color yarn. So we are going to thread our needle, and we're going to use it double-stranded so that it's extra strong. This isn't as important for the baby size hat because you're not really gathering that much into one place on the baby's hat. But when you're doing the larger hats, especially like the larger adult hat, you're going to have a lot of fabric that you're going to be gathering together here. So I would definitely recommend doubling your yarn, because that will just make it a little bit stronger. Or if you chose a yarn that isn't very strong, like some one-ply yarns, or even other kinds of yarns, you can pull on it and break it pretty easily. So if you need something that's really strong, you can find a stronger yarn that in a similar color, or you can even use embroidery floss in a matching color. That works too. All right, so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to be stitching through each of these ridges. So to begin, I'm just going to make a little stitch in between the first ridge and the last ridge, just to kind of anchor my stitches. Here, I'm going to pull this out just a little. I don't want to lose that. And make one more stitch, because that way, when we pull hard on this later, it's not going to this end is not going to slip out. Okay, so we've anchored it, and now we are going to just run our needle through that last little V along each ridge, just like this. Just pushing it through each of those. And we're going to do that all the way around the top edge of the hat. And this hat, actually, this is a similar hat to another hat that I designed for the Creative Crochet Corner. There's a video on a ribbed watch cap. It's using the same stitch pattern as this, but if you're more interested in a watch cap, something that without the ear flaps, and you want to learn how to do some really simple short rows, that is a cool pattern to check out too. It's got a very similar look to this one. All right, we've almost made it around to the beginning, and then we will pull everything tight to close that top of the hat there. And like I said before, on the larger sizes, this is a lot of fabric to gather in here. So it's not going to completely close I'm gonna cinch this closed. Let's see, maybe you can see from the top. I'm just gonna hang on to that and pull as tightly as I can. There's still a little hole. I can get my pinky in there. But on the larger sizes, you're gonna have a significantly larger hole. Like you might even be able to put 2 of your fingers in there, I don't know. But pull it as tightly as you can. And then you are going to just put your needle in through, let's slide it through the same fabric where we anchored our stitch before. Anywhere really along that top edge. You're just gonna poke it to the inside and then flip it so that you can see the inside of your hat. Okay, so this is pulled as tightly as you can, and then you're just gonna have to stitch the rest of it closed because there's a little hole there and you don't want a hole there. So from here, you'll just take a little stitch through the opposite edge and bring it together. Okay, maybe another stitch the same direction and bring it together. And then you can come over here, and I'm basically like making an X. Before I made my stitches here, now I'm gonna make my stitches here. But this part is a little bit more than an art than more of an art than a science. You just have to kind of look and see what areas you need to kind of grab and pull them together. And the magic of pom-poms will help hide this little seam here. If you're not crazy about how this looks without your pom-pom on it, don't worry, because we have a pom-pom for that. Okay, I don't know why pom-poms were invented. I don't know if they were invented to cover your stitching up at the top of the hat, but this is it's a very good use of a pom-pom. And I am a little bit pom-pom crazy. I actually have a video on the Creative Crochet Corner that is basically like a love letter to pom-poms. I mean, it's me telling you how to make a bunch of different kinds of pom-poms. If you're interested in that, you can check it out. All right, so then I'm just gonna double check and make sure it turned out okay. Looks pretty good. It looks like there's one little stitch there. We'll fix that from the outside. Just flip it so that you can actually see what it's going to look like. That would be covered up by your pom-pom, but I think I'm just gonna grab a little bit more fabric here and pull it tight to kind of cover up that, I don't know what that was, sort of an extra little stitch across. There we go. Pull a little bit tighter. All right, so it's good to just, check in, look at the outside, and then you can weave in your ends on the inside. So we'll just do that here. Weaving in a couple of directions, because you want this to be a very sturdy burying of your tails. You don't want this to undo itself, because then your hat's gonna open up at the top, and that would be cold and a bummer. All right, so we'll go in that direction, and then we're gonna go in this direction. Here we go. And, whoops, got a little loop there. All right, and then just to be extra thorough, same direction as first time. All right, then we can cut that off. And of course you would have, finished your edging all around the bottom, and that would all be woven in. And so your hat would be mostly finished except for the pom-pom and the braids and a little bit of blocking. So this, I would recommend putting this over like a little towel. You could roll up a towel and put the end of a towel in here or something, and then give it a shot of steam on top, or actually wet block it over your towel so that you can get a little bit of a flatter area up here. It isn't quite so bulky. You can kind of shape that how you want it to be. Okay, so let's talk about pom-poms. So here we have, in the directions, I tell you, you just need to have a 3.5-inch piece of cardboard. This is a little notebook because I cheated on the cardboard, that's okay. And you're gonna wrap your yarn, your contrast color yarn or whatever yarn you're using, around it a certain amount of times. I think I tell you 140 to 160 times. Now, if you don't wanna count that, that's okay. I'm a counter. I count things all the time when I'm working on things without even realizing I'm doing it. So that wasn't a problem for me. But if it just looks about like this, you're fine. You don't need to, count every single time you wrap it around there if you don't want to. Then you're going to cut, or actually before you even do that, I tell you to cut a 16-inch piece of yarn. You don't have to measure it. You can just kind of guess. And then you're going to cut another piece of yarn that's twice that long. Okay, so this is about twice that long, folded over. And these two are what you're going to use to tie your pom-pom together. So the shorter piece, just the 16-inch piece, you're just going to use your finger and slide it underneath all your loops of yarn. And then you're going to tie this in a tight knot. Now, if you used a yarn that breaks very easily, you know, you can use, like I said before, you could use embroidery floss or something else here. But this first one, if that breaks later, it doesn't matter because you're going to wrap something around it anyway. It's going to be reinforced. So you don't have to tie it as tight as you absolutely possibly can. You don't have to. But, you know, tie it tightly enough so that this cinches in a little bit here. Okay, and then you're going to flip the piece over and you're going to use your doubled piece of yarn for extra strength to tie it again on this side. And we're just, again, just tying it right in the middle of our loops. And I find it, so this actually does need to be a little bit tighter. Pull it pretty tight. And I find that if you are able to rotate this, that it kind of holds your piece a little bit better. Or if you have a buddy and they can put their finger there for you, that's helpful too. And then that's a nice tight knot. So we're going to hang on to these and we're going to slide this set of loops off of our cardboard or our notebook. And then we are going to take the same two doubled strands and we are going to wrap them around to the other side and tie it again. So basically we're using the two, we're tying each side individually first to make this step a little easier here. So we're going to tie it nice and tight right in the middle. And again, if you want to, you know, you can twist it a little bit to help it hold that first while you're making the second part of the knot. All right, and then make sure you don't lose those strands of yarn because you're going to use those to fasten that to the top of your hat. Then you are going to use some scissors and cut your loops like this, right down the middle. This is always the most fun part of making pom-poms to me, when you cut it open. It floofs up. And here's another thought. When you are making this pom-pom, sometimes your yarn will, like if you pull it from the center of the skein, it'll be kind of crimped almost looking, like wiggly looking, not very straight. That might make it a little bit more difficult to get a nice fluffy pom-pom. I actually ended up using some of that yarn in here and I can see it in there. That's what's reminding me. So it might be easier to take the yarn off the outside of your skein if that's what's happening to you, so you have a nice straight pieces of yarn in your pom-pom. All right, so I'm just checking for any extra loops I didn't cut. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that pom-pom looks a little crazy, Brenda. Well, that's because we have to give it a haircut. So it looks a little shaggy. That's okay. That's how they look if you do your pom-pom this way until you give it a little haircut. So at this point, just kind of fluff it up a little bit, and then we are just going to trim off any of the parts that seem a little extra long and shaggy. And I mean, you could, if you didn't want this big of a pom-pom, you could just keep trimming, making it smaller and smaller if you wanted to. But I want to keep it about the size because I like big pom-poms. And I'm just mostly cutting off the excess, the extra long pieces that kind of stick out. And it does make a little bit of a mess, but if you do this over your wastebasket, it's not such a bad deal. You don't have to clean up then. And actually, I would recommend also another thing, don't do as I do. Don't use super tiny scissors like this because it takes a lot longer and you're not getting as much surface area at a time. I just forgot to bring my larger scissors for this. They don't have to be really big, but these are super tiny little scissors for cutting steeks and cutting yarn ends and things. And they're very sharp, which is nice for doing this, but it does take a little bit longer. So All right, in the interest of time, we'll probably stop there, even though I just keep making my pom-pom look lovely and round. It's just my nature. I just want to keep doing that, but I'm going to set it aside. But before I do that, I just want to explain these two strands of yarn. You can use those to sew it to the top of your hat. Just take one strand at a time and send it through to the inside, and you can tie them together and then weave in your ends, or you can push them back out and weave them into your pom-pom. Just send them right through the middle of your pom-pom and clip them off if you don't feel like weaving them into your crochet work. Okay, so you'll have a pom-pom on the top. How adorable is that? And then the last thing we want to talk about are the little ties, the braided ties on the ends. So in my pattern, I have you cut a bunch of strands of the yarn to, I think it's 32 inches for each strand of yarn. And then you can decide how long you want the braids to be. So if you know you're going to make a baby hat and you're not going to make them quite as long, you could cut them a little shorter if you're starting to run out of yarn, maybe like 28 inches or something like that to begin with, because you'll end up cutting off some here. Or conversely, if you know you want to have really long tails, because this, I mean, you really can't do too much here. They're mostly just for cuteness. If you wanted to make them longer, you could definitely cut them longer. So I tell you in the pattern to cut 24 pieces of 32 inches long strands. Okay, so here's 12, and then here's the other 12 that I have sectioned off for the other ear flaps. So you'll use 12 at a time. And here, I'll demonstrate on this one. You're just going to find, if you have a larger crochet hook laying around, that's great. Otherwise, you can use the H hook. I've done it, and it's fine. And you're just going to find the center of that ear flap. You can maybe just fold your ear flap in half like this, and then you're going to push your hook from the inside, from the wrong side, to the right side. Okay, so from the inside of your hat to the outside. Then you're going to lay the center of those 12 strands on your hook, and I'm pulling back kind of tightly here so that this hook is, because it's not a very big hook, so this hook can bring it through my crochet fabric, and you're gonna bring it through till you have a big enough loop that you can put 2 fingers through, like this. And then at this point, you can check the ends to see if they're pretty much matching up. You don't want to have one side of this way longer than the other. And then you're just going to grab onto all those pieces with your fingers and pull them through that loop, just like that. And then you can pull that a little tighter. So that's what fastens them to your hat. And then after you've done that, then you can braid them. So because I wanted these really kind of chunky looking stubby braids, I used a lot of strands here. And if you don't like how that looks, or you just want to do something that's a little thinner, then you can do half as many strands if you want. And so at this point, you have to take your strands and divide them into groups of 3. So for me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're going to be in sections of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there's 8. So if you used half as many strands, you would have 4 in each section. Okay, so then you're just going to braid it. So you just take right over left and left over right into the center. Right over left, left over right. So you're just going to continue this, and you can make your braid as loose or as tight as you want, and then braid it for as long as you want your tie to be, and then you're just going to tie a knot, and I'll show you that in just a second once we get this long enough. So if anybody has any remaining questions, please try to get them in, because I am going to wrap up pretty soon. Let's see if this is about as long as this one. Just use that. Maybe even a little longer. That's okay. So you can see here, you know, you could actually probably cut these a few inches shorter for the baby size if you like how long my little braids look. But if you wanted them to be longer, then certainly cut them longer, like I was saying before. I'm going to undo just 1 or 2 because I feel like that's just a little too long. And then you're just going to tie an overhand knot by just wrapping it across and tucking it in through the bottom. Take your time to get all the strands, and then you're just going to pull it till it's about in the right spot, and you can kind of move it up and down and then pull it really tight once you're happy with where it's at. A nice tight knot there. And then I would recommend trimming the bottom to whatever length you want it to be at, but that way it'll be nice and even. Okay, so look like that. All right, looks like we don't have any extra questions. I'm so glad that all of you guys could join me today. It was fun teaching you all about this hat, and then I hope you are excited to make it and you go out and make one for everyone you know. So yeah, till next time, keep crocheting and have some fun making these hats. Bye.